These crisp fall mornings remind me of when I was young. Smell of gunpowder, sighting in the rifle, getting ready for deer season. It also reminded me of the jumper cables that I went into the bar. And the bartender said to the jumper cables, "I'll serve you, but don't start anything." We read one of the greatest gospel stories, story of the blind man. We know him by name, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus. And it reminds us of how blind we are in our faith. It also reminds us of our need to be aware, to be alert, to continually ask God to take away the blindness within us, which is our sin. And I always love it when the bishop writes something good in the Catholic Times, because it gives me something to think about. And the bishop, with permission from Bishop Paprocki, wrote this in the diocesan paper about the Democratic National Convention. And I don't know if you know this, but all references to God had been purged from the platform in the draft of the party platform. And so outcries, protests from within the Democratic Party and from without. And they put back in this phrase, "and everyone willing to work hard, the chance to make the most of their God-given potential." Sounds good, but before you relax and think, "Oh good, God's back in," it's important to know how that got back in there. There was the chairman of the convention, Antonio Villaraigosa, had to call for the vote. It was a voice vote, called for it 3 times. The yeas and the nays came back equal all 3 times, as far as the volume level or the amount of people responding. And he said at the end, the ayes have it. Why? Well, there was something troubling about that. There was a blatant disregard for the democratic process. It was because the president wanted God back in there. That is fine. But what about the next president, if he wants to remove God from the party platform? Apparently that can be done regardless of the vote. It's whatever the leader wants. And that doesn't bode well for democracy. Now, even more troubling is that it's a distraction from the more disturbing positions in the platform. In 1992, President Clinton put in a line there with regards to abortion. It should be safe, legal, and rare. And this year, they removed one of the words. Which word do you think they removed? Rare. That's kind of scary. And so they dropped it. The other thing is that the platform supports the right to abortion regardless of the ability to pay. Well, now there's 3 ways that can happen. Taxpayers can be required to fund it, insurance companies can be required to pay for it, or it's done for free. And I can assure you that it's not done for free. So, the platform also supports this so-called same-sex marriage and calls for the repeal of the Defense of Marriage Act, which was established by President Clinton in '96, that defined the reality that it is one man and one woman. Now, why did Bishop Paprocki write about these things in the party platform? He was careful to point out there are many positive, very good positions and planks of the Democratic Party platform. But he's pointing out those that are endorsing things that are explicitly, intrinsically evil. And now something that's intrinsically evil means there's no way to get around the fact that what's being done cannot be made right regardless of the circumstances. So he points out very carefully to say it's not It's not his job, it's not my job to tell people how to vote. But we have a moral obligation to speak out on moral issues. He would be abdicating his duty. I would be negligent in my duty if I remained silent about these for fear of sounding political. Now, I must take a little moment to step aside and say, it is important to be informed and to not be blind like Bartimaeus. And I mentioned one time, I said, I've done my penance. I watched the presidential debate. It is a penance for me. It is a suffering for me. But I feel a moral obligation, especially now as being a priest. How can I tell people to be informed if I'm not taking that time, although it seems wasted sometimes, to know what's going on in the political realm, to investigate, to study, to learn? And so I have become more involved by the office that I hold, by necessity, to be involved more politically, or to know more about what's going on. So he goes on to say that people of faith must object to platforms that have positions that promote serious sins. And the thing, too, is that the Democratic Party's official support for abortion is very troubling for pro-life Democrats. And so what about the Republican Party? There is nothing in the political platform on the Republican Party that promotes intrinsically evil things. But there is the position that supports the death penalty for capital murder cases. Now, the Catechism teaches in 2267, assuming that the guilty party's identity and responsibility have been determined, the traditional teaching of the Church does not exclude recourse to the death penalty if this is the only possible way of effectively defending human lives against the unjust aggressor. If, however, non-lethal means are sufficient to defend and protect people's safety from the aggressor, authority will limit itself to such means, as these are more in keeping with the concrete conditions of the common good and more in conformity with the dignity of the human person. Basically, it's saying that it is not necessary to have the death penalty, and so it is not a good position to hold. But it is not in and of itself intrinsically evil. Some would argue various methods and ways of addressing the needs of the poor, or feeding the hungry, or solving challenges of immigration, prudential judgments about the most effective means, about achieving moral ends. And those are not intrinsically evil, those are differences. Certain things came up, I remember, about positions that Paul Ryan had, and people wanted to claim that he was in opposition to what the church's teaching is. And that was not the case. He was expressing a means of achieving a morally desirable end, but not espousing intrinsically evil positions. Now, Bishop was careful to point out, not telling you or anybody which party or candidate to vote for or against. But, he says, I am saying that you need to think and pray very carefully about your vote, because a vote for a candidate who promotes actions or behaviors that are intrinsically evil and gravely sinful makes you morally complicit and places the eternal salvation of your own soul in serious jeopardy. He goes on to say, I pray that God will give you the wisdom and guidance to make the morally right choices. And so this ties in very closely to the gospel today. Bartimaeus comes to Jesus, and Jesus sees the blind man and says, what would you like me to do? I'm thinking this has got to be the biggest duh moment in the whole Gospel of Mark. There's a blind man standing before Jesus, and Jesus asks him, "What do you want?" It's pretty obvious to me what the guy wants. I don't know if it would be to a group of people. I would think it pretty obvious. If the guy can't see, he would want the Lord to cure him. And that's important, and that's a very important line in that story. When we are in our sinfulness, the Lord asks us to acknowledge our own sinfulness and to ask for help so that we can see clearly. My hope and prayer is that everyone can see clearly the situation before us in our nation, that we can see clearly what God is calling us to do. God is calling us to be active, to participate in our political system, as painful as it may be sometimes. Now, that doesn't mean that I watch all the political ads. You can be assured that the mute button on my remote is worn thin. Every time I see those political ads, I'm like, "Ugh, mute, stop!" I'm so tired of seeing them. Are you not? And it will be a great celebration on Tuesday, November 6th, when the ads will stop. But praise God that we have them, because there are many countries that don't have the ads. There are many countries that don't have a vote, or their vote goes into a ballot box that has a hole in the bottom. And it means nothing. But our vote counts. And the president that we have now was legally, legitimately elected. And he deserves our respect because of the office he holds, even if he is espousing positions that are contrary to God's will. The office requires our respect, and the process of election requires our respect and our participation. So, vote early, vote often. I'm kidding. Please vote. Vote understanding what God's will is and asking that question, what is the common good? Not what helps me, or maybe just, the people around me, but what helps the common good and what is in conformity with God's will. And remembering the story of Bartimaeus. Lord, Master, I want to see. And ask the Lord to open the eyes of all of those who vote, that God's will would be done in this election and every day.